Okay, psychological themes through the core studies once again. Section B is also worth 35 marks, same as Section A, and it's focused on the areas, perspectives and debates. There are normally about 5 questions. There could be a bit more, could be a bit less. One of them is normally worth 12 or 15 marks, which is quite a fair chunk of the total paper stuff, so making sure we've got our structure for that is going to be quite important. It's quite unpredictable because there's obviously 7 approaches and perspectives and a whole bunch of debates as well, so it can kind of really come from all angles. Here's a few examples of the kind of generic questions that you could be asked about. So all I want you to do is take a minute and think about how you'd approach them. I like to think that we're pretty prepared for that already, but this video isn't about answering questions specifically, it's about armouring ourselves to answer questions. So take a moment, have a look at that, and we'll come back to them another time. So if we're all about preparing, armouring ourselves to answer the questions to get top marks in Section B, what do we need to do to prepare? And the answer is, you've got to make sure you can describe and discuss the areas, perspectives and debates. For the areas, we need to give the key concepts of them, 2 for each. We need to know the general strengths and weaknesses of them. This allows us to discuss them. And we're going to need to know how the studies link to those areas and how they demonstrate the strengths and or weaknesses of the areas. We've also got to be able to describe the debates, give positives and negatives for adopting different stances on either side of the debate, say to what extent psychology supports each side of the debate and link research to it, but that's actually next time's lesson. Just a reminder, when we're evaluating an area or perspective, there are certain golden nuggets that we can apply to pretty much everyone. On the plus side, they all have applications, they give some practical use in the real world that will help people's lives, or they can give us new understanding in terms of which side they fall on debate, and they all often use typical research methods which have typical strengths. On the minus side, with, in my opinion, the possible exception of the individual differences approach, they're generally pre-reductionist because they take one stance on assuming that behaviour has a cause. They have weaknesses of the research methods that are associated with them, and they generally tend to be deterministic, which means that they say behaviour is caused by one particular thing, and we like to think that we've got a bit more freedom in what we do and how we behave, so that's seen as kind of like a bit of a negative. Right, high time you did some work. You will find on Teams, if you look there, that I've uploaded a Word document that's this big table, and all you have to do is, for every approach and perspective, fill in 2 key concepts, a strength, an example of where that strength appears in a study, do that again, and then 2 weaknesses that are contextualized. Couldn't be simpler. I could just leave you to it, but I ain't gonna. I'm gonna give you some examples of things that you could fill in different areas there, just to help you out. So get yourself a copy of this electronic document in front of you now. The key concepts I've chosen to give you an example on social here is key concept 1, behaviour is influenced by the actual, imagined or implied presence of others. What we do depends on who is around us. Our families, friends or authority figures will create different responses. So there is the key concept in a nutshell with a little bit of explanation to get us our second mark. And our second key concept is behaviour is caused by the social situation, and whilst there may be individual differences in reactions to any one situation, everyone is influenced by their environment and the people who are in that environment or groups that we are in within that environment. Our actions vary depending on our situation. For instance, we are different when you're at school and when we are at home, according to my type in there. So there you go. They're pretty similar, but they're distinct enough to be 2 separate key concepts and get us 4 marks. Right, you better pause me up, fill in the other 6 pairs of key concepts, You've got them all in your notes, you've got a book to refer to, make them nice and clear, give a little explanation, jobs are good. Now you need to prepare up 2 strengths of an area and be able to contextualise that in a study. Now, at this point, it's probably fair to let you know that if you're at the end of year 12, this is much more difficult to do than when you're at the end of year 13, because you know less than half the psychology. Some questions may simply say, support your answers with relevant research, which doesn't even mean core studies. So all the year 13 applied stuff we do, the stuff on mental health, 6 studies on child, 6 studies on criminal, those are ones you can bring in which might support your arguments much better than the core studies you currently know. So if you're finding this tricky, it does get easier. However, I've chosen to help you out with the psychodynamic perspective, and I've said the first strength is that it uses case studies which produce enormous amounts of qualitative data, which is rich and interesting. By getting the in-depth stories, it's possible the data has more validity than would be obtained from more superficial quantitative research. So there you can see that I have said what the strength is, and I've said why it's a strength. So the next thing, I want you to give an example from the study. And I've said little Hans was observed and interviewed on many occasions. So we know about his dreams, the plumber, and games, his pretend children, which adds a great deal to our understanding of his experience. So there you go, a little bit of context, a little bit of explanation. We make our point very straightforward. Second strength, applications. They nearly all have applications, and psychodynamic, big time of course, used to help people in the everyday world. One application is psychotherapy, Freud's talking cure, in which he used conversations to uncover traumas repressed in the unconscious mind, and by uncovering them, release their power to trouble people more. Again, you'll understand that better once we've looked at psychodynamic cures within the mental health aspect of the course in year 13. And our context, little Hans had a conscious fear of horses. However, his real fear was of castration due to his fear and guilt regarding his Oedipus complex and his jealousy of his baby sister. By talking to him about it, it helped him resolve his complex, and consequently the horse phobia was dealt with. So there we've got 2 strengths, 2 contexts, easy peasy. And while you're on a roll, why don't you take this time to do another 6 pairs of strengths for the other approaches and perspectives. Right, we're on to weaknesses now. It'd be very easy to continue with the psychodynamic, because I'm sure you saw lots of weaknesses arise from certainly our first strength, because of course if you're getting lots of qualitative data you're losing objective measurements. It's very subjective, which is quite a weakness. Of course it's reductionist, doesn't consider other topics. But I'm going to flip over to the biological area just to give you a bit more of a rounded example. So before you hear my ideas on what might be the weaknesses of the biological approach, why don't you have a little think about what you'd say? One weakness of the biological approach is that it is reductionist. It fails to take into account multiple factors to explain behaviours. The approach believes that all behaviours have a physical cause, such as a change in brain chemistry. However, it may overlook the influence of the environment, other people, and individual differences on the cause of those brain changes. So I've said what the weakness is, and I've explained it to the best of my abilities. Now a bit of context. But before you hear my answer, why don't you have a little think about how Sperry or Casey might really have oversimplified the areas that they were trying to explain. Casey, his study on delayed gratification showed neural differences in high delayers and low delayers, suggesting that different functions in the ventral striatum and right inferior frontal gyrus may have caused the differences. However, the differences may have been learned as successful strategies from an early age. Bear in mind that the original high-low gratification task, the cookie task, took place when they were 4. So there's been quite a lot of environmental influence in that time that he doesn't really consider. However, learned as a successful strategy from an early age, this may have caused the brain differences, not the other way around. So that's what I wrote. I think we've got clear context there. Let's crack on. Can you think of a second biological weakness? Our second biological weakness is that it has a lack of ecological validity in its research methods. This means behaviour is demonstrated in very specific conditions, usually in a lab, and this means that behaviours may not translate to the everyday world. Ecological validity is about generalisation, but not generalisation of the sample, about generalisation of behaviour. Back over to you then. How exactly did Sperry or Casey show a lack of ecological validity? Our example here is Sperry's study on hemisphere lateralization involved having split-brain patients being presented with words or images to one visual field for 1/10 of a second while focusing on a central point on the screen. This isn't exactly an everyday activity, is it? And that means the effects demonstrated by the participants would very rarely be seen in the everyday world. So there's my bit of support for you. If you fill the rest of that in, there's nothing on there on approaches that you won't be able to answer quite easily, so we're getting our thinking in first. Next up, as you said, we're going to be looking at the debates. There's your next job, but we'll talk through that together in a couple of days. Bye for now.